In our world of snap judgments and quick dismissals, sometimes the most powerful lessons come from unexpected places. Comment where you're watching from today, as we share a story that might just change the way you look at others. It was a crisp morning in downtown Cincinnati when Jason Williams, the newly appointed manager of First Metropolitan Bank, straightened his designer tie and gazed out his pristine office window. The polished marble floors and elegant decor of the bank reflected everything he thought banking should be: prestigious, powerful, and exclusive. At 42, Jason had worked his way up through sheer determination and what he considered impeccable judgment of character. He prided himself on knowing exactly who belonged in his bank and who didn't, but that day would challenge everything he thought he knew about worth and dignity. The morning had started routinely enough. Jennifer Delian, his assistant, had just brought in his fourth cup of artisanal coffee when Robert Hernandez, one of the junior tellers, knocked on his door. Robert's face showed an unusual mix of concern and uncertainty. "Mr. Williams, there's someone here requesting to speak with you about a loan application," Robert said, his voice carrying a note of hesitation. Jason sighed, setting down the financial report he'd been reviewing. "What's the problem? You know the standard procedures." "Well, sir, he's different. He's been here 3 times this week, and he's quite persistent about speaking with you personally." Jason's jaw tightened. He despised when people didn't follow proper channels. Different how? "He appears to be—" Robert lowered his voice. "Homeless, sir." A derisive laugh escaped Jason's lips before he could stop it. "Homeless? In my bank?" He stood up, straightening, his custom-made suit. "Fine, I'll handle this myself." As Jason strode through the bank's main floor, he spotted him immediately. Standing quietly near the velvet ropes was Michael Aguilar, a man in his 60s wearing clean but weathered clothes. Despite his humble appearance, there was something dignified about the way he held himself. "I understand you've been asking for me," Jason said, not bothering to hide his disdain. "Though I must say, you're wasting both our time." Michael looked up, his eyes clear and steady. "Mr. Williams, thank you for seeing me. I need a small business loan of $50,000. The laugh that burst from Jason was sharp and cruel. Several customers turned to look. "A loan? And what collateral would you be offering? That plastic bag you're carrying?" Michael remained composed. "I have a business plan, a detailed one. And references from—" "Sir," Jason cut him off, "this is First Metropolitan Bank, not a charity. We have standards, requirements." He gestured to Michael's worn jacket. "Clearly you don't meet them." By now, a small crowd had gathered, including Nicole Robinson, a regular customer who looked uncomfortable with the scene unfolding before her. But Jason was too caught up in his moment of authority to notice. "Do you know what my job is?" Jason continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "I protect this institution from bad investments. And you, sir, are the definition of a bad investment." Just then, the bank's heavy glass doors swung open. A poised woman in her early 40s entered, her presence immediately commanding attention. Several employees straightened up, recognition flickering across their faces. "Actually," Michael said quietly, "I was counting on you to look past appearances." "Look past?" Jason scoffed. "This isn't a fairy tale. This is banking. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have actual clients to attend to." As Jason turned to walk away, the woman who had just entered spoke. "Is there a problem here?" Her voice was calm but carried unmistakable authority. Jason spun around, his customer service smile automatically sliding into place. "Not at all, Mom. Just explaining our policies to someone who—" His voice trailed off as he noticed how the bank had gone eerily quiet. Jennifer Delian, who had appeared at his elbow, whispered urgently, "Sir, that's Usha Vance." The blood drained from Jason's face. Usha Vance, the newly appointed state banking commissioner, known for her progressive policies and fierce advocacy for community-based lending programs. "Mr. Aguilar," Usha said warmly, "I see you finally made it. Here." She turned to Jason, her expression cooling considerably. "I assume you've reviewed his proposal," Jason stammered. "His proposal?" "Yes," she continued, "the micro-lending initiative for homeless veterans transitioning back into the workforce. The one my office has been particularly interested in. As a pilot program." Michael Aguilar stood quietly, his dignity intact. "I tried to explain, Mr. Williams. Before my circumstances changed, I was a financial advisor for 20 years. When I lost my wife to cancer, the medical bills, well, they took everything, but they didn't take my knowledge or my desire to help others." The bank had gone completely silent. Every eye was on Jason, who was now shifting uncomfortably in his expensive shoes. "Perhaps," Usha suggested, her tone making it clear it wasn't really a suggestion, "we should all step into your office and review Mr. Aguilar's business plan properly. After all, First Metropolitan prides itself on being a community leader, doesn't it?" As they walked toward his office, Jason could hear the whispers beginning. Nicole Robinson was already on her phone, likely sharing what she'd witnessed. Kevin Armstrong, another regular customer, was shaking his head in disapproval. "Oh, and Mr. Williams," Usha added, just loud enough for others to hear, "you might be interested to know that Mr. Aguilar's proposal has already received preliminary approval from the State Banking Commission. We were simply waiting to see how individual banks would respond to applicants like him. It's been illuminating." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of paperwork and apologies. Jason found himself reading through the most detailed and professional business plan he'd seen in years. Michael Aguilar's proposal for a financial literacy program for homeless veterans was not just viable, it was brilliant. By afternoon, the story had spread throughout the bank. Angela Stafford, the head teller, was already implementing new training procedures for handling non-traditional clients. Douglas Holland, the loan officer, was revising their application protocols. As Michael left the bank that day, loan approved, and dignity intact, he paused at the door. "Mr. Williams," he said kindly, "sometimes the best investments aren't the ones that show up in designer suits." Usha Vance lingered after the papers were signed. "You know, Jason, banking isn't just about protecting assets. It's about believing in people's potential, all people." She placed a report on his desk. "I'll be watching First Metropolitan's community outreach programs with great interest." That evening, as Jason sat alone in his office, he stared at his reflection in the window. The designer tie and custom suit suddenly felt less important than they had that morning. On his desk sat Michael's proposal, a testament to the fact that worth couldn't be measured by appearances. The next day, a memo went out to all First Metropolitan branches, announcing new initiatives for inclusive banking practices. And if anyone noticed that Jason Williams started treating every customer with equal respect, regardless of their appearance, well, that was just good banking practice. Remember, dignity doesn't have a dress code, and worth isn't measured by wealth. Have you ever judged someone too quickly, only to be proven wrong? Share your story in the comments below. The ripples from that fateful morning at First Metropolitan Bank spread far beyond its marble walls. As our story continues, we discover how one moment of humility can spark a chain of transformation. In the weeks following the confrontation, Jason Williams found himself navigating unfamiliar territory. His once pristine worldview had developed cracks, through which new understanding began to seep. The bank's atmosphere had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Kimberly Nguyen, one of the bank's longtime customers, noticed the change first. Once the security guards had quietly discouraged certain types from entering, now everyone was greeted with the same professional courtesy. Christopher Roth, the head of security, had implemented new training protocols focusing on respectful treatment of all visitors. One morning, as Jason arrived at work, he noticed a small group gathered outside the bank's entrance. Leading them was Michael Aguilar, now dressed in a modest but clean suit, conducting what appeared to be an informal financial literacy workshop. Among his audience was William Baker, a local business owner Jason had always courted as a premium client, listening intently and nodding with approval. The principles of financial management don't change based on the size of your account, Michael was saying. Whether you're handling millions or trying to stretch your last $20, the fundamentals remain the same. Jason paused, coffee in hand, and found himself drawn into the discussion. The man he had once dismissed so callously was articulating complex financial concepts with a clarity that made them accessible to everyone. Inside the bank, changes were taking root. Michelle Rivera, the new community outreach coordinator, a position created in the wake of Michael's loan approval, was transforming the bank's approach to local engagement. The same halls that had once echoed with exclusive privilege now buzzed with diverse voices and new possibilities. "Mr. Williams," called out Lauren Dawson, one of the loan officers, "you might want to see this." She handed him a report that showed an unexpected trend. Their new inclusive banking initiatives, far from being charitable liabilities, were actually improving the bank's overall performance. The micro-lending program in particular had a remarkably low default rate. As Jason studied the numbers, Heather Martin from marketing approached his office. "Sir, you won't believe who's on the phone. The Federal Reserve Bank of Cleveland. They want to know more about our Veterans Financial Literacy Program." The irony wasn't lost on Jason. The very program he had nearly laughed out of his bank was now attracting attention from the highest levels of the banking industry. But the real eye-opener came later that week when Usha Vance returned, this time with Andrea Flores, the state treasurer. They found Jason not in his office, but sitting in on one of Michael's workshops, taking notes. Quite a change from 3 weeks ago, Usha observed with a slight smile. Jason stood to greet them, noticing how his automatic reach for his designer tie seemed less important now. "Mrs. Vance, Ms. Flores, welcome to First Metropolitan's Community Financial Education Center." The former storage room had been transformed into a warm, welcoming space where Michael and other volunteer financial advisors held regular sessions. Today, Patricia Cordova, a local teacher, was learning about building an emergency fund, while Crystal Hernandez, who lived in her car just months ago, shared her success story of opening her first savings account. "You've exceeded our expectations," Andrea said, surveying the scene. "When Usha told me about your initial reception of the program, I had my doubts." Jason felt the familiar flush of shame, but forced himself to own it. Sometimes our greatest mistakes lead to our best innovations. As if on cue, Michael entered, with a new group of participants. Among them was Brandon Pacheco, a veteran who had been homeless for 2 years after returning from deployment. Brandon's story had become something of a legend in the bank, how he had gone from sleeping in shelters to launching a successful food truck business with one of First Metropolitan's microloans. "The thing about financial dignity," Michael was saying to his group, "is that it's not about how much money you have, it's about understanding and controlling your financial future." Jason watched as Vanessa Brandt, one of his formerly most elitist employees, eagerly volunteered to explain basic banking services to the group. The same woman, who had once suggested installing deterrent sprinklers outside the bank, was now passionately advocating for financial inclusion. Later that afternoon, during the bank's monthly staff meeting, Jason made an announcement that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. "Starting next month," he declared to the assembled employees, "First Metropolitan will be partnering with the local shelter network. will be providing basic banking services through mobile units, reaching people where they are. Timothy Gonzalez, the bank's conservative CFO, raised his hand. Sir, the operational costs will be offset by the new accounts and improved community relations, Jason finished. But more importantly, it's the right thing to do. The meeting room fell silent. Then Ashley Blanchard, a junior teller who had rarely spoken up before, stood. Mr. Williams, my brother was homeless for a while after losing his job. If a bank had given him a chance back then, well, maybe he wouldn't have. She paused, composing herself. This matters. It really matters. As the day drew to a close, Jason found himself sitting across from Michael in what had become their weekly review meeting. The contrast to their first encounter couldn't have been starker. You know, Michael said, shuffling through some papers, when I first came in here, I wasn't just seeking a loan. I was testing a theory. A theory? Jason leaned forward, intrigued, that the banking system isn't inherently exclusive. It's just been operating on outdated assumptions. Change those assumptions, and you change the system, Jason finished, understanding dawning in his eyes. Just then, Jennifer Delian knocked on the door. Sir, there's a call from the American Bankers Association. They want to feature First Metropolitan in their next publication. Something about revolutionary community banking practices. Michael smiled quietly. Funny how success stories write themselves, isn't it? That evening, as Jason prepared to leave, he noticed something he'd overlooked for years. In the bank's elaborate marble entranceway, engraved in small letters, was the institution's original motto from 1925, financial security for all. All, he mused aloud. Not just some, not just the wealthy, all. Outside, the sun was setting over Cincinnati, casting long shadows across the street where Michael's evening workshop was just beginning. Among the participants, Jason recognized Samantha Bradshaw, local business owner who had once kept her distance from those people. Now she was there, sharing her expertise about small business management with anyone willing to learn. The lesson was clear. When you open the doors of opportunity, everyone benefits. The bank's transformation wasn't just about numbers on a spreadsheet. It was about restoring human dignity, one account at a time. Have you ever witnessed a moment of transformation that changed not just one person, but an entire community? Share your experiences in the comments below. As autumn settled over Cincinnati, First Metropolitan Bank's transformation was no longer just a local story. The ripple effects of that fateful confrontation between Jason Williams and Michael Aguilar had grown into waves of change that were reshaping the very foundations of community banking. On a particularly crisp morning, Melissa Hartman, the regional banking supervisor, arrived unannounced for what should have been a routine inspection. Instead, she found herself witnessing something unprecedented in her 20-year career. The bank's lobby had been temporarily transformed into a job fair, specifically designed for unhoused individuals and veterans. David Campbell, a former investment banker turned advocate, was conducting mock interviews, while Ronald Jones from HR provided guidance on resume writing. This isn't what I expected to find, Melissa admitted to Jason, who was helping Angela. Davis set up a booth for financial counseling. Neither did I 6 months ago, Jason replied, straightening his tie. No longer designer, but chosen with purpose rather than prestige. But sometimes the best innovations come from our biggest mistakes. The job fair was in full swing when Courtney Riley, one of the bank's newest employees, herself a graduate of Michael's program, rushed over with exciting news. Mr. Williams! The Federal Reserve just confirmed they want to use our program as a model for national implementation. The announcement might have once been the pinnacle of Jason's professional ambitions. Now it felt like merely another step in a much more meaningful journey. Michelle Brown, a local reporter, was covering the event. "Mr. Williams," she asked, notebook in hand, "did you ever imagine First Metropolitan would become the national standard for inclusive banking?" Before Jason could respond, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A group of banking executives from across the state, led by Lindsay Mathis, MD, the head of the State Banking Association, had arrived for an unscheduled visit. "We've been hearing rumors," Lindsay announced, her skepticism evident, "about homeless people being given loans, about banking regulations being relaxed." The old Jason might have stammered excuses. The new Jason merely smiled and gestured to where Brandon Wood, a former homeless veteran, was now conducting a workshop on small business accounting. "Not relaxed, Dr. Matis," he corrected. "Reimagined." As if on cue, Michael Aguilar emerged from his office. Yes, he now had an office, followed by Usha Vance and a surprising guest, Grace Williams, the Federal Reserve Board Governor. "Ladies and gentlemen," Usha announced, "first, Metropolitan's Community Banking Initiative has been selected as the pilot program for a nationwide financial inclusion project." The silence that followed was broken by spontaneous applause from the job fair participants. Jason noticed Laura Joseph, one of his formerly most conservative board members, wiping away tears. "But the default rates," Lindsay protested weakly, "are lower than our traditional loans," Kevin Armstrong, the risk assessment officer, interjected. "Turns out when you give people dignity along with opportunity, they move heaven and earth to succeed." The transformation wasn't just in the numbers. Jason watched as Carolyn Melendez, once homeless herself, now confidently guided others through the basics of digital banking. Nearby, Nicholas Forbes, a veteran who'd struggled with PTSD, was sharing his journey from sleeping in his car to owning a successful food truck franchise. "The real revolution," Michael explained to the assembled executives, "isn't in the loans we provide, it's in the dignity we restore." Just then, Jennifer DeLeon approached with an elderly gentleman, Howard Rangel. Jason recognized him from the local shelter. "Sir," Howard began hesitantly, "I never thought I'd say this in a bank, but I feel human here." The words hit Jason like a physical force. He remembered his own cruel laughter just months ago, how far they'd come, how far he'd come. Later that afternoon, during a private moment, Grace Williams shared something surprising. "You know, Jason, when Usha first told me about your initial reaction to Michael's proposal, I thought this program was doomed." "So did I," Jason admitted. "I was everything wrong with banking." "No," Grace corrected. "You were everything that could change about banking." The day's success was punctuated by an unexpected visit from Christina Miller, the mayor's economic advisor. She arrived with news that the City Council had unanimously voted to make First Metropolitan's model mandatory for all banks operating within city limits. "This isn't just about banking anymore," Christina explained to the gathered crowd. "This is about redefining what community means." As the job fair wound down, Jason noticed Michael sitting quietly in a corner, watching the scene with satisfied eyes. Beside him, Sean Lowe, a former Wall Street executive who'd recently joined their team, was furiously taking notes. "What are you writing?" Jason asked, curious. "Everything," Sean replied without looking up. "Because someday, people are going to ask how this happened, how one moment of humiliation turned into a revolution in banking." That evening, as the cleaning crew led by Patricia Perez tidied up the lobby, Jason found himself standing in the same spot where he'd once laughed at Michael. The marble floors still gleamed, but they no longer seemed to be about prestige. They reflected something far more valuable: hope. "Mr. Williams." It was Alexander Robinson, one of their new clients, a veteran who'd been living in his car just 3 months ago. "I just wanted to say, I deposited my first paycheck today from my own business. Jason smiled, remembering how he'd once judged worth by appearance. Congratulations, Mr. Robinson. You're what this bank is all about now. As night fell over Cincinnati, the lights of First Metropolitan Bank glowed warmly, no longer a beacon of exclusivity, but a lighthouse guiding people home to financial dignity. Have you ever been part of a transformation that started with a mistake but ended in a miracle? Share your story in the comments below. 1 year to the day after Michael Aguilar first walked into First Metropolitan Bank, the institution was unrecognizable, not in its appearance, but in its soul. The final chapter of our story reveals how one moment of humility sparked a nationwide revolution in banking. The morning began with unexpected news. Pamela Brooks, the bank's PR director, burst into Jason's office waving a newspaper. The headline read, "First Metropolitan's inclusive banking model goes national. Federal Reserve mandates implementation." Jason sat at his desk, remembering the man he'd been a year ago. The designer suits and premium cologne had given way to something more valuable, genuine respect from his community. Just then, Donald Smith, the janitor, poked his head in. "Mr. Williams, they're ready for you in the main hall." The main hall had been transformed for today's anniversary celebration. Among the gathered crowd were faces that told the story of their journey. Brittany Ramirez, DVM, once hesitant to even enter a bank, now ran a successful mobile veterinary clinic funded by their microloan program. Nearby, Cameron Lang, a former skeptic on the board, was enthusiastically explaining their veteran outreach program to visiting executives. Usha Vance took the podium first. "1 year ago, I witnessed something rare in banking. The moment when arrogance gave way to enlightenment." She paused, sharing a knowing look with Jason. "Today, First Metropolitan isn't just a bank, it's a blueprint for change." The statistics spoke volumes. Michelle Rivera presented their annual report. Loan default rates had dropped to historic lows, community engagement had skyrocketed, and their client base had diversified beyond all expectations. But the real story was in the faces of people like Rachel Scott, who'd gone from sleeping in shelters to owning a thriving catering business. Michael Aguilar, now the bank's director of community development, stepped up next. "Banking isn't about marble floors or mahogany desks," he began, his voice carrying the wisdom that Jason had once dismissed. "It's about believing in human potential." The ceremony was interrupted by breaking news. Stephanie Anderson, their media coordinator, rushed in with an announcement. Congress had just passed the Financial Inclusion Act, largely modeled after First Metropolitan's programs. Jason watched as Jeffrey Howard, one of their first microloan recipients, embraced his daughter, now a college student thanks to their educational savings program. Nearby, Vanessa Gray, who'd once lived in her car, was teaching a group of bankers from Chicago about their housing transition program. "This, a real revolution," Jason found himself saying when it was his turn to speak, "wasn't in our policies. It was in our perspectives." The celebration was momentarily disrupted when Christina Wood, a former banking executive who'd opposed their changes, walked in. She stood quietly at the back, watching as Kelly Long, a formerly homeless veteran, demonstrated their mobile banking app designed specifically for those without permanent addresses. "I was wrong," Christina admitted to Jason later. "We were all wrong about what banking could be." As the day progressed, success stories filled the hall. Adrian Sanders shared how the bank's small business incubator had helped him start a construction company. Emily Carter described her journey from financial literacy student to financial counselor. The most powerful moment came when William Trujillo, a local business leader, stood to speak. "A year ago, I wouldn't have let some of these people into my store," he admitted, tears in his eyes. Now they're my business partners, my friends, my community. During the lunch break, Jason noticed Douglas Holland, their longtime loan officer, deep in conversation with Grace Morris, a homeless advocate he'd once avoided. They were discussing expanding the mobile banking units to rural areas. "You know what the best part is?" Michael said, joining Jason by the window. "None of this feels revolutionary anymore. It just feels right." The afternoon brought a surprise visit from Shannon Weaver, the Federal Banking Commissioner. "First Metropolitan has redefined what we thought was possible," she announced. "Your success has rendered our old exclusionary policies obsolete." As the day drew to a close, Jason found himself back in the spot where it all began. The marble floors still gleamed, but now they reflected a different kind of wealth, the wealth of human dignity restored. "Mr. Williams?" But it was Jennifer DeLeon again, just like that first morning. "Someone's here to see you." Standing in the doorway was a young woman, Ashley Garcia, Michael's first success story. She now ran her own financial literacy program in another state. "I came to say thank you," she said simply. "Not for the money, but for learning to see people differently." As the sun set over Cincinnati, casting long shadows through the bank's windows, Jason realized that their story wasn't really about banking at all. It was about the moment when one man's humiliation had transformed into an entire community's elevation. The next morning, as Jason arrived at work, he noticed something new. The bank's old motto had been updated. Beneath the words, "Financial Security for All" was a new line, "Because dignity has no minimum balance."